What if the man who gave you everything lost you to the man who gave you more? Michael thought he had it all, a loving wife, a rising career, and the trust of the man who led him there. But when trust turns to temptation and power becomes a weapon, the betrayal hits harder than a blade to the back. Keep listening, because not all affairs are born out of lust. Some are born out of strategy and secrets. Michael Donovan had always been the kind of man who played life by the rules. 39 years old, sharp-featured with a calm demeanor, and a reputation for being dependable to a fault. He had worked his way up from a junior account manager at Wesley Strategic Group, one of Chicago's top-tier consulting firms, to the role of executive director, a position earned with sweat, sacrifice, and silence. He had a wife, Emily, elegant, poised, beautiful in a timeless way. A school counselor by profession, but more than anything, Michael saw her as his grounding force. Their home in the suburbs of Lincoln Park, their golden retriever, Milo, the wine nights on Fridays, everything felt real. But what Michael couldn't see, was how easily real could be rewritten. It all began with Derek Langston. Derek was the kind of man that other men either admired or hated. Early 50s, silver-streaked hair that only added to his charisma, and an aura that demanded attention the moment he entered a room. He wasn't just Michael's boss, he was the founder of the company, a man who had built an empire from nothing. Derek spoke in boardrooms the way poets spoke in verses, confident, smooth, and just vague enough to keep people leaning in. Michael had always looked up to him. And maybe, in some way, Emily had too. It started small. A gala event for the company's annual benefit. Michael brought Emily, dressed in a dark green satin gown that complemented her chestnut hair perfectly. She turned heads, even Derek's. Especially Derek's. He greeted her with a kiss on the hand. Harmless. Gentlemanly. But Michael noticed the way Derek's eyes lingered. He brushed it off. A powerful man like Derek looked at everyone that way, didn't he? 2 weeks later, Michael was told Derek wanted him to lead a special project, one that would require long hours, late nights, and multiple out-of-town trips. A promotion in disguise, Michael thought. He didn't know it was a setup. Derek began texting Emily. At first, it was under the guise of checking in on Michael's workload, friendly updates, jokes about workaholics. Then compliments. You must be so proud of him. You're a lucky woman. And then, slowly, the messages shifted. You ever feel like he's married to his job more than to you? You deserve attention too. Real attention. Emily, at first, ignored them. She loved Michael. Or, at least, she thought she did. But there was something about Derek's words, seasoned, smooth, persuasive. He made her feel seen in a way Michael hadn't in months. One rainy Wednesday, while Michael was out of town for a presentation in Dallas, Derek invited Emily for coffee. Just a friendly conversation, he promised. They met at a quiet spot near the lake. It was supposed to be 20 minutes. It turned into 3 hours. He listened to her, asked about her dreams, her fears, her loneliness. And when she spoke about how distant Michael had become lately, how the late hours were eating away at them, Derek leaned in and said, "Sometimes, the people who give us stability aren't the same people who give us life." Emily didn't respond, but her silence screamed louder than words. It wasn't physical yet. Not then. But the emotional line had already been crossed. They started meeting weekly. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a walk by the lake. A brush of her hand on his coat. A look that lingered too long. Michael noticed something was off. Emily had started dressing up more, even when she wasn't going anywhere. Her phone was never left on the table anymore, always in her pocket, her flip screen down. He didn't suspect Derek. Not yet. He trusted him like a mentor, like family. But then came the business trip that changed everything. Michael was scheduled for a 4-day leadership conference in Seattle, one Derek had personally recommended him for. The night before the trip, Emily was distant. Said she was tired. Kissed him goodnight without the usual warmth. He looked at her for a moment too long before leaving in the morning. Something gnawed at him, but he shook it off. It was just stress. Or so he told himself. But as his plane left O'Hare Airport, Derek's car pulled into the driveway of the Donovan home. Emily was already waiting by the door. Michael's flight to Seattle landed at 3:17 p.m. The conference center was pristine, buzzing with high-level executives and keynote speakers, yet something felt off. He should have been excited. This was the kind of leadership event people fought to attend, but the whole time, a quiet unease hummed in the background of his thoughts like static on an old radio. He texted Emily from his hotel room that evening. Landed safe. Place looks amazing. Wish you were here with me. No reply. Emily stood in the kitchen, her phone screen lit up with Michael's message unread. She could see his name glowing through the glass of her screen, but she didn't touch it. Not yet. Derek leaned against the kitchen counter, holding a glass of red wine like it belonged to him. Like everything in the house already did. You okay? He asked. Emily nodded, too quickly. Just thinking. He walked over slowly, took the wine glass from her hand, and replaced it with his. Don't think too much. You've done enough thinking. Tonight, just be. The moment was heavy. Electric. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and Emily didn't flinch. That was the first moment she realized. She wasn't afraid anymore. It started in their bedroom. The same bedroom she and Michael had shared for over 8 years. Derek didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. The way Emily looked at him, vulnerable, craving something she didn't even understand, gave him all the permission he needed. And when it happened, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't messy or reckless like some impulsive mistake. It was slow, deliberate, like two people who had been planning it in their minds long before their bodies followed. Afterward, they lay in silence. Emily stared at the ceiling. Derek lit a cigar on the balcony like it was a victory. I feel like I just crossed a line I can't uncross, she said. He looked back at her, expression calm. Some lines are meant to be crossed, especially when they keep you trapped. Back in Seattle, Michael had called her twice by now. No answer. No text back. He sat alone in his hotel bed that night, staring at the dark ceiling, trying to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe she left her phone in another room. Maybe she fell asleep early. But even as he rationalized, he felt it, that crack in the glass. When Michael returned from Seattle, Derek was back to being his charming, magnanimous self. Great job out there, Mike. I saw the presentation slides, powerful stuff. You're the future of this company, he said, clapping him on the back. Emily greeted Michael with a warm, if slightly nervous smile. How was the trip? She asked, pouring him a coffee. Good. Long missed you, he replied, watching her a moment too long. He tried to kiss her. She turned her cheek. Something shifted. Over the next few weeks, Emily seemed more detached. She'd retreat to the guest room sometimes, claiming she couldn't sleep. She changed the subject whenever Michael mentioned kids, a topic they'd been discussing for over a year. Her scent was different. The way she carried herself changed. Confident, controlled, cold. And Michael, always observant, began to unravel. It wasn't just the changes in Emily. It was Derek. Suddenly, Derek was always around, offering to pick Emily up for company events when Michael was working late. Texting Michael late at night with urgent updates that strangely matched times Emily disappeared from home. Suggesting marriage counseling with a tone that almost seemed mocking. Michael started checking her phone when she was in the shower. Nothing. She had become too good at hiding things. He called AT&T and asked for phone records. Dozens of late-night calls to a blocked number. He tried installing a discreet GPS tracker in her car. Disabled within 2 days. He was losing control. And worse, he was losing the woman he still loved. One Friday evening, after a silent dinner, Michael finally spoke. Is there something going on, Emily? She didn't look up from her salad. What do you mean? With us. You've been distant. Different. Emily set her fork down. Her face was unreadable. You've been gone, Michael. Even when you're here, you're not here. Maybe this is just what happens when people grow apart. He wanted to scream. To accuse. To rip the silence open and pull the truth out by its roots. But instead, he nodded. Maybe. The next morning, Michael arrived at work early. The office was still quiet. But as he passed by Derek's corner suite, he noticed something strange. Derek's door was cracked open. Inside, on the desk, was a photo. It was Emily. Not just any photo. A candid one. Her at the gala, in that green dress. The one where she looked like she had just stepped off a movie screen. Michael had never seen that frame before. It was in a silver holder. Personal. Intimate. His heart dropped into his stomach. Michael didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above him, its slow rhythm mocking the chaos in his head. Next to him, Emily slept soundly, her breathing steady, peaceful, like she hadn't just kissed another man while her husband sat in a car across the street, watching his world collapse. He replayed the moment over and over. Her smile, the hand on Derek's chest, the way she leaned into the kiss like it was familiar, comfortable, like it wasn't their first time. It was the kind of kiss you give someone when you already know their body, their scent, their rhythm. Not a beginning, a continuation. The next morning, he woke up early and left the house without saying a word. He needed space. Not just to think, to plan. Something inside him had snapped. Not in a violent way, not even in a loud way, but in that quiet, dangerous kind of way that happens when you've been disrespected for too long and finally stop hoping things will fix themselves. He drove aimlessly for hours, passing through neighborhoods he hadn't visited in years. He thought about the early days of their marriage, the excitement, the laughs, the intimacy. He thought about how hard he had worked to build their life, the sacrifices he made so she could finish grad school, the nights he stayed late at work to pay for her dream trips, and her startup business that never even took off. He remembered the time she broke down crying because she thought she had failed him. He held her that night and told her, "You could never fail me." But she had. And the betrayal wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about the sex. It was about who she did it with, his boss. A man who pretended to be his friend, his mentor, someone who invited him into his home, shook his hand, toasted his promotions. It was layered, twisted, and Michael was starting to see just how deep this web ran. Back at work, he began to observe more carefully. He watched Derek, noticed the subtle changes, the way he paused when Emily's name came up in conversation, the quick glances he gave Michael, as if measuring whether he suspected anything. The jokes that felt just a little too pointed. The meetings that suddenly excluded Michael without explanation. One afternoon, while pretending to help Derek with a presentation, Michael saw it, a text message that popped up on Derek's phone screen. "I missed last night already." It was from Emily. Michael's blood turned cold. He memorized the time. 1:47 p.m. They were both supposed to be in separate places. Emily had told him she was at a spa. Instead, she'd been with him. He left the office without saying a word, his hands trembling with fury. That night, he waited until Emily was asleep, then took her phone and synced it to a cloned device using software he'd researched all week. He needed confirmation. Evidence. He needed to know the full truth. Not just what he suspected, but what they were saying behind his back. What he found the next day shattered him. The messages were endless. "Derek, you look like a goddess in that black dress. I wanted to rip it off right there in the elevator." "Emily, you should've. I hate pretending with Michael. Every time he kisses me, I think about your hands instead." "Derek, you don't have to pretend much longer. I'm serious about this. I'll make a place for you. For us." "Emily, promise." "Derek, promise." He's a smart guy, but naive. He won't see it coming. Michael stopped breathing for a second. He won't see it coming. They weren't just sneaking around. They were planning something. Talking about a future. Discussing him like he was just an obstacle to remove. Emily, the woman he defended, supported, loved more than anyone else in the world, was plotting a new life behind his back, and his boss was helping her design it. With his money, his trust, his everything. He saved screenshots. All of them. Hundreds of them. He printed the most damning ones and put them in an envelope. Marked it, "For when I'm ready." But still, he said nothing. He kept up the charade, pretending not to know, smiling when she walked in the room, making love to her when she initiated, even though every touch made his skin crawl. And then came the final straw. One evening, Derek announced during a team meeting that there would be some restructuring at the firm. Several roles would be reviewed, including Michael's. He was being reassigned. Demoted. Michael stared at him across the conference table, rage boiling under his skin. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Derek wanted to erase him. Out of the company. Out of the marriage. Out of everything. That night, as Emily came home with wine and Thai food, pretending it was just another Thursday, Michael knew it was time. He was done being silent. He waited until dinner was over. Until she was tipsy, smiling, cheeks flushed, reaching for him across the table. Then he said quietly, "How was the spa last Tuesday?" She blinked. "What?" He repeated it, slower. "Last Tuesday. You said you were at a spa." She hesitated. "Yeah, I was." "Why?" Michael stood up and walked to his office. He came back with the envelope and placed it in front of her. "Because I know you weren't." Her face drained of color before she even opened it. The silence in the room was so heavy it could have crushed glass. She didn't speak. She just stared at the photos, the messages, the raw proof of her betrayal laid out like evidence in a courtroom. He watched her. Not out of hate. Not even sadness. Out of clarity. The woman in front of him wasn't his wife anymore. And maybe she never really had been. Emily stared at the evidence on the table, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope again like she couldn't believe it was real. She flipped through the printouts, each message screaming the truth louder than the last. Her lips parted like she wanted to explain, maybe beg, but nothing came out. For the first time in their marriage, she looked small, powerless, exposed. Michael leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on her. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she finally whispered. Michael raised an eyebrow, a slow, almost cynical gesture. How far is too far, Emily? Was it the first kiss? The hotel room? Or was it when you started planning a future with the guy who signs my checks? Tears welled in her eyes. But they didn't move him. Michael, it wasn't like that. He laughed, just once, dry and hollow. You literally said I was naive, that I wouldn't see it coming. What exactly wasn't like that? Emily's face crumpled. I never stopped loving you. The words fell flat, dead on arrival. Michael stood up and walked slowly toward the window, looking out over their quiet suburban street. The sun had set, and porch lights flickered on one by one. Kids played in driveways. The world kept spinning, indifferent to the implosion happening inside their home. You know what I think about sometimes, he said softly. I think about that night you got food poisoning and threw up all over the hallway floor. I cleaned it up. Every last drop. You were crying, embarrassed. I told you it was okay. That I loved you anyway. He turned to face her. You think he'd do that for you? Emily didn't answer. I protected you, Michael continued. From everything. Your family. Your failures. Your own fears. And while I was building a future for us, you were building an escape plan with someone who's been trying to push me out since day one. Emily finally stood, her voice rising in panic. I made a mistake. It wasn't supposed to mean anything at first. He made me feel seen. Michael, you were always so focused on work and responsibility. I felt invisible. Michael stepped closer, his expression unreadable. So you burned our life to the ground because you felt invisible? She nodded weakly, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then why not talk to me? Why not say, I feel lost, or I need more from you? Why not fight with me, instead of against me? Because I was scared, she whispered. Because I thought if I told you how unhappy I was, you'd leave. Michael shook his head slowly. You didn't give me a chance to stay. You made the decision for both of us. Silence again. She moved closer, placing a hand on his chest. I'm sorry. He looked down at her hand like it didn't belong there anymore. Sorry doesn't fix betrayal, Emily. She pulled back, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her posture shifted. Her sorrow turned defensive, almost bitter. So what now? You want a divorce? Is that it? Michael tilted his head. You think this is about what I want? You made that choice when you crossed the line with him. She scoffed, wiping at her eyes. Fine. Maybe it was wrong. But don't pretend like you were perfect. You were always so cold, so distant. He laughed again, this time sharper. You want to rewrite history now? You want to paint yourself as the victim? You cheated, Emily. You betrayed me, not just as a husband, but as a man. And now you want to twist the knife by blaming me for it. She didn't respond. Michael walked over to the kitchen counter, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a set of papers he had quietly prepared after gathering the evidence. Legal documents. He placed them on the table in front of her. What is this? She asked cautiously. My proposal. You get the car, and I'll keep the house. We split the savings. No alimony. No drama. Just clean separation. Her jaw dropped. You already had this ready? He nodded. I've had it ready for days. I was waiting to see if you'd come clean. But you didn't. You kept lying. So now, I'm done. Emily stared at the papers, her hands clenched into fists. You really want to throw away 13 years over one mistake? Michael's voice was calm, chillingly calm. You threw it away, Emily. I'm just accepting it. Suddenly, her face changed. Something darker flashed in her expression, frustration, maybe even contempt. You think you're better than me? You think you're some hero in all of this? No, Michael said. I think I'm the idiot who believed in someone who never really loved him. She slapped the table, her voice breaking. Don't you dare say that. I did love you. Then why were you ready to move in with him? Why did you say you hated pretending with me? Why did you send him that photo from our bed? That stopped her cold. She knew he'd seen everything now. Every message. Every picture. Every lie. Michael picked up the papers and slid them back into the folder. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. You have until the end of the week to decide if you want to fight this or sign it peacefully. After that, I'm done. He grabbed his coat and walked to the door. Michael, she said one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. He paused, one hand on the doorknob. I don't hate you, he said, but I'll never trust you again. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a woman who had gambled away everything for a thrill, and a man who had finally stopped waiting to be chosen. The next morning, Michael stood in front of the tall glass tower that housed the corporate headquarters of Wexford Financial. His suit was crisp, perfectly pressed, and his expression carved from stone. He wasn't there as an employee today. He was there as a man betrayed, no longer tethered to diplomacy or restraint. He had requested the meeting through official channels, but he knew Darren Hughes, his boss and his wife's lover, wouldn't be expecting this confrontation to happen face to face. The receptionist greeted him politely, not sensing the storm underneath his calm demeanor. As he took the elevator to the 32nd floor, Michael's reflection stared back at him in the mirrored walls, sharp eyes, clenched jaw, and the weight of 1,000 thoughts. When the elevator doors slid open, Darren's assistant, Clarissa, blinked in surprise. Mr. Callahan? I didn't know you had a meeting scheduled. I do now, Michael said flatly, brushing past her. He opened the office door without knocking. Darren looked up from behind his desk, his usual smug confidence faltering for a fraction of a second. Michael, what a surprise, he said, rising from his chair, straightening his blazer. Sit, Michael snapped. The authority in his voice wasn't professional, it was personal. Darren raised an eyebrow but obeyed. What's this about? Michael closed the door behind him and locked it. I know, he said simply. Darren paused, lips parting, then closing again. Know what? Michael leaned forward. Emily. You. The affair. The messages. The photos. All of it. Darren's face changed. Not guilt. Not fear. Just calculation. Look, Michael, things got complicated. I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't intend to hurt anyone. Michael's laugh was quiet, bitter. You didn't intend to hurt anyone, yet you were sleeping with your employee's wife? And you thought that wouldn't destroy something? Darren stood again, holding up his hands. Emily came to me. She was unhappy. She needed someone. I just happened to be there. You just happened to be there? Michael echoed. You're her husband's boss. You knew exactly what you were doing. Darren's expression hardened. Look, I'm not going to stand here and apologize for something that was mutual. I didn't force her into anything. Michael's jaw tightened. This isn't about force. It's about character, about betrayal, and about consequences. Darren's smile returned, smug, oily. And what consequences do you think you can dish out here, Michael? You think storming into my office makes you the hero in this story? Michael calmly reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. He placed it on Darren's desk. You know what's on this? He asked. Darren hesitated. I assume more the same? Michael nodded. Messages. Photos. Time-stamped screenshots. A full record of your affair with my wife, collected over the last 2 months. Darren leaned back. And you're threatening to go public? Michael shook his head. No. That would be too easy. Darren frowned. Then what do you want? Michael leaned in. I want you to resign. Today. Quietly. No lawsuits. No scandal. Just a clean break. You leave the company, and I'll make sure this never touches the media. Or your wife. Or your daughter. The last part hit hard. Darren's nostrils flared. You son of a... Ahad. Michael cut him off. You thought you were in control of this. But you're not. I've already sent copies of everything to my lawyer. If anything happens to me, if I get fired, if I mysteriously get into a car accident, if my bank accounts start acting weird, that drive goes straight to every major news outlet in the state. Not to mention your wife's inbox. And let's not forget the board of directors. Darren's hands curled into fists, but he didn't move. Michael could see the war in his eyes, ego clashing with the cold reality of consequences. You're bluffing, Darren said quietly. Michael smiled. Test me. A long silence passed between them. Finally, Darren exhaled. And what do you get out of this? Michael stepped back, picking up the USB. Closure. Justice. And the satisfaction of knowing that you don't get to keep everything while I lose it all. Darren dropped back into his chair, defeated. Michael walked toward the door, but paused before unlocking it. Oh, and one more thing, he said, turning slightly. If I ever find out you've contacted Emily again, in any way, I'll burn everything down. I don't care if I go down with it. Are we clear? Darren stared at him. Crystal. Michael left the office without another word. Back in his car, he sat behind the wheel and breathed. The tension in his body didn't vanish, but something shifted. The power was no longer lopsided. He had been played, yes. Betrayed, absolutely. But now he was fighting back, not with rage, but with intelligence, precision, and purpose. When he got home, the silence felt different. Less haunting. More intentional. Emily wasn't there. She had gone to stay with her sister for a few days, probably hoping to give him space. Michael went into the bedroom, opened his drawer, and pulled out an old photo, the two of them, on a beach in Maine, 5 years ago. Smiling. Happy. Whole. He stared at it for a moment before sliding it into the trash. There was no going back now. No repairing what was broken. Not because of anger, but because trust, once shattered, never truly fits the same again. And as night fell, Michael sat down at his desk, opened a blank document, and began typing something new. A resignation letter, not for his job, but for the version of himself who had always put others first, who had ignored his instincts, who had stayed quiet when he should have spoken. That man was gone. What rose in his place was someone no one would see coming. 3 days passed. 3 long, slow-moving days where the silence between Michael and Emily grew into a canyon, wide, unforgiving, and filled with echoes of everything left unsaid. Emily had been staying at her sister's place on the west side, unsure whether her absence was a punishment or a form of self-preservation. She had tried texting him a few times, short, hesitant messages. "Can we talk? Please let me explain. I made a mistake. I was weak, but I still love you." No response. It was the 4th night when she finally gathered the courage to come home. The house was dark when she stepped inside. She carried a small overnight bag and her heart in her throat. Her hands trembled as she opened the front door and stepped into the stillness. The scent of Michael's cologne still lingered faintly in the air, clinging to the space like a ghost refusing to leave. She didn't call out. Didn't want to wake a sleeping lion. Instead, she quietly set down her bag and wandered into the living room. Her eyes fell on the coffee table. Her wedding ring rested there, cold and alone. Next to it sat a thick manila envelope with her name written across it in Michael's handwriting. She hesitated, then sat down and slowly opened it. Inside were photographs. Printed ones. Dozens of them. Screen captures of text messages. A few grainy photos taken from across streets, through windows, her and Darren, kissing in his car, sneaking into a hotel. Her breath caught in her throat as she flipped through them. Michael had known for a while, and he hadn't said a word. He had simply watched, documented, prepared. There was also a letter. Typed. Simple. Brutal. "Emily, I wanted you to know I've already spoken to Darren. He's stepping down from the company. Quietly. No one will know why unless you give me a reason to change that. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a betrayal of trust, of vows, of respect. I don't hate you. I just don't recognize you anymore. You can stay here if you want. I'll be moving out by the weekend. The house is in both our names. We'll figure out the logistics later. I'm not ready to have a conversation right now. Please don't try to talk me out of this. That part of us is already gone. Emily stared at the letter, her vision blurring. Her hands shook as she clutched the paper to her chest. She had imagined anger, fury, shouting, slamming doors. But this silence, this cold, calculated separation, it shattered her far worse than screaming ever could. She sat there on the couch for over an hour, replaying the last 6 months in her mind, how it started with innocent flirtation, how Darren made her feel seen when she felt invisible in her own marriage, how she let herself fall into the illusion that her choices wouldn't have consequences. But now the illusion had evaporated, and all that was left was devastation. At midnight, she wandered into the bedroom. The closet was half empty. Michael's suits were gone. His shoes. Even the cologne bottle from the bathroom shelf. Her legs gave out, and she crumpled to the floor. The next morning, she called him. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She drove to his office. He wasn't there. One of his coworkers said he had taken personal leave. A family matter, they called it. No one knew more. Or if they did, they weren't saying. On the 5th day, he finally answered her call. His voice was calm, but cold. What do you want, Emily? I want to talk, she whispered. Face to face. There was a long pause. You've already said enough. Everything you needed to say, you said when you were in his hotel room. That's not fair. No, he said. What's not fair is having your whole life burned down by the person you trusted most. So don't talk to me about fairness. She felt tears rushing up again. Michael, I miss you. I made a mistake. A horrible one. I wasn't thinking. That's the thing, he interrupted. You were thinking. Every time you texted him. Every time you lied to me. Every time you slipped out of bed to answer his calls. Those were choices, Emily. Not accidents. Not weak moments. His words cut with surgical precision. I still love you, she whispered. Another pause. I don't think you even know what that word means anymore. The call ended. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window with a glass of wine, the same brand they had shared on their anniversary last year. She stared out into the dark yard, remembering the night he had wrapped her in a blanket and carried her out there to watch the stars. She remembered laughing, kissing, promising. Now, the stars looked cruel, cold, indifferent. Over the next few days, she started calling friends, trying to explain. Some were sympathetic. Others were blunt. Why him? Her best friend Lisa asked. Of all the people, your husband's boss? I don't know, Emily said through tears. I was lonely. I thought Michael didn't see me anymore. Did you ever stop to talk to him? Lisa asked. Or did you just go looking for the first man who gave you attention? Emily couldn't answer. The hardest part was realizing that Michael hadn't begged, hadn't chased. He wasn't throwing dishes or shouting threats. He had simply walked away, and that made her fear he was truly gone. On day 8, she found his wedding vows folded inside her jewelry box. She hadn't remembered keeping them. His handwriting, strong, honest, filled with hope. I promise to choose you every day, even on the hard days. I promise to fight for you, even when it's inconvenient. I promise to be your home. And she had burned that home to the ground. Now, she stood in the ashes, wondering if anything could be salvaged. But deep down, she already knew the answer. It was a rainy Friday when Emily saw Michael again. 2 weeks had passed since the day he walked out, and now, as if summoned by the ache in her chest, he appeared on their front porch. She had almost convinced herself that he was never coming back. When she opened the door, he looked the same, calm, collected, but his eyes were different now. Hardened, a little more distant, a little less hers. Can I come in? He asked, his voice steady. She nodded, stepping aside. He walked in slowly, like a man returning to a battlefield long after the war had ended. There was silence. She waited. Then he turned to face her. I've been staying at a cabin upstate, he said. Just needed quiet. Emily nodded, unsure what to say. Her heart thudded in her chest like a frightened animal. I'm not here to yell, he continued, or to punish. I've done enough thinking for both of us. She blinked back tears. And I've decided to file the papers. Her breath caught. He watched her carefully. You thought I'd come back, didn't you? She nodded slowly. I hoped. Not because I deserved it, but because I still love you. Michael looked at her for a long time. Love isn't just what you feel when things are good, Emily. It's what you do when things get hard. And you didn't love me in those hard moments. You chose someone else. I was lost, she whispered. I was stupid. I thought you didn't want me anymore. You were so focused on work, I felt invisible. And instead of talking to me, he said, you made a deal with your loneliness. And you paid with our marriage. She closed her eyes, the shame pouring through her like cold rain. I'm not proud of who I was, she whispered. You shouldn't be, he said softly. But that's not the point anymore. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. The papers. I already signed. All you need to do is add yours. Her fingers trembled as she took them. The weight of finality hit her like a wave. This was really happening. I don't hate you, he said, breaking the silence. I wish I could. It would make this easier. But the truth is, I just can't unsee what I saw. I can't unknow what I know. I would do anything to take it back, she said, voice cracking. I know, he nodded. But time only moves forward. They stood there in silence. After a while, he walked to the bookshelf and looked around the house one last time. I spent 12 years here, he said quietly. I gave you my 20s, my 30s. I built a future around you. And I destroyed it, she said. Michael looked at her, not angrily, but with a deep sadness. You did. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and set it on the coffee table. I was going to give this to you the night everything fell apart. She opened it slowly. It was a bracelet, delicate, gold, with a small charm shaped like a compass. So you'd always find your way back to me, he said. That was the idea. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't know what I had, she whispered. No, he said gently. You knew. You just thought it would always be there. And now it won't be. He walked to the door, hand on the knob, then paused. For what it's worth, he said, without turning around, I hope you find yourself. Not for me. For you. Because the woman I fell in love with, she deserved better than the woman you became. The door opened, then closed, and he was gone. Emily sank to the floor, the bracelet still in her hand, the silence wrapping around her like a burial shroud. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, then faded altogether. She was alone. Utterly. Truly. Finally. But for the first time, she couldn't blame anyone but herself.